Friendship surprises everyone when Wildcat tries to help injured monkey at the edge of the forest. Why would a battle-hardened feral cat risk its life for an injured monkey, a creature it should see as prey? The answer lies not just in instinct, but in surprising clues about both animals' hidden pasts leading to an alliance that defied nature itself. Subscribe, like, and listen now to discover the incredible true story of the Forest Edge Alliance. The tableau unfolding just beyond the ancient oak tree was utterly wrong. A glitch in the natural order that made the crisp morning air crackle with tension. A small primate, no bigger than a squirrel, whimpered pitifully at the base of the tree. One tiny arm held at an unnatural angle, its dark eyes wide with pain and terror. Circling it protectively, tail-twitching ears flattened, was Rusty, the scarred feral orange tomcat, known for his fierce independence and general disdain for all other creatures, including the human who occasionally left food out. But Rusty wasn't attacking the vulnerable monkey. He was defending it. His low, guttural growl was directed at the third player in this bizarre drama, a lean red fox, its brushy tail, still eyes gleaming with predatory calculation. The fox paced restlessly just yards away, clearly viewing the injured monkey as an easy meal, yet hesitant to close in. The only thing holding it back was the spitting, arched-back fury of the orange cat. Rusty, significantly smaller than the fox, was a whirlwind of contained aggression, positioning himself constantly between the predator and the injured primate. He darted forward with hisses that promised shredding claws, then retreated slightly, never taking his eyes off the fox, never leaving the monkey unguarded. The air vibrated with the unnatural standoff. The monkey's cries were thin threads of sound against the backdrop of the cat's growls and the fox's silent, intense appraisal. This wasn't how it worked. Cats hunted small creatures, foxes hunted cats, and small creatures. A feral tomcat defending an injured monkey from a fox. It defied every instinct, every law of the woods that bordered this isolated cabin. Why? What strange pact or inexplicable impulse drove this solitary, battle-worn cat to risk himself for a creature so utterly different, so clearly doomed? The tension stretched taut, threatening to snap, leaving the outcome hanging precariously in the cold morning light. Arthur Miller rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the strange cacophony from the forest edge pulling him from his morning coffee routine. At 72, his life in the small, sturdy cabin nestled against the vast expanse of the Pisgah National Forest was deliberately quiet. He'd moved here after his wife passed, seeking solace in the rhythms of nature, becoming a keen observer of the deer, the birds, the occasional black bear lumbering through, and the more permanent, though elusive resident, the orange feral tomcat. He'd nicknamed the cat Rusty years ago for his somewhat ragged rust-colored coat and the old scars that marked him as a survivor. Rusty was undeniably wild, keeping a wary distance, only deigning to eat the food Miller left out. When the old man was safely back inside, Miller respected the cat's independence, admiring his resilience from afar. They had an understanding, unspoken and separated by a barrier of species and caution. That morning, however, the sounds were different. Not the usual birdsong or rustling leaves. First, there had been a high-pitched, frantic chattering, unlike any local creature Miller recognized. Then came the agitated, aggressive yowls of a cat. Rusty undoubtedly, but sounding more distressed than territorial. Curiosity piqued Miller, pulled on his boots and coat. stepping out onto the dew-dampened grass and walking cautiously towards the tree line where the sounds originated. He saw the monkey first, a tiny thing huddled and shivering at the base of the big oak, its fur dark against the leaf litter. Miller stopped short, astonished. Monkeys weren't native here. This must be an escaped pet, perhaps a marmoset or small capuchin, somehow lost or dumped far from home. Its whimpers were heartbreaking, and one arm was clearly broken, bent at a sickening angle. It looked utterly lost and helpless. As Miller absorbed this strange sight, Rusty emerged from behind the tree. The old man instinctively braced for the cat to pounce on the injured creature, but Rusty ignored Miller entirely, his focus absolute. He began circling the monkey, his body language radiating tension. It was then that the red fox materialized from the undergrowth, drawn by the sounds and scent of vulnerability. Miller watched, frozen for a moment by the sheer improbability of what happened next. Instead of joining the hunt or fleeing, Rusty turned on the fox. The feral cat, usually so avoidant, became a fierce protector, placing his small body between the predator and the primate. The growls, the hisses, the arched back. It was a display of astonishing, misplaced courage. Witnessing this bizarre, desperate defense stirred something in Miller. The monkey was injured, terrified, and far from its natural habitat. The fox was patient and deadly. And Rusty, the solitary feral cat, was inexplicably risking himself. Miller couldn't just stand by and watch this tragedy unfold, however strange its participants. The sight of Rusty's fierce loyalty to this unlikely ward, combined with the monkey's obvious distress, became the inciting incident. He had to intervene. He had to try and help, not just the monkey, but perhaps in some way the brave orange cat as well. His quiet morning observation had just become a rescue mission. Taking a slow, deliberate step forward, Miller tried to assess the situation without causing further panic. The fox, wary of the human presence but not yet deterred, shifted its position, testing Rusty's defenses. Rusty responded instantly, spitting and feinting a charge, forcing the fox back a crucial foot or two. The monkey, caught in the middle, let out another terrified chatter, trying to drag itself further into the base of the oak tree, its injured arm dragging uselessly. Miller knew sudden movements could spook Rusty, potentially leaving the monkey completely exposed, or worse, provoke the fox into attacking before he could properly intervene. He began speaking in a low, calm voice, the way he used to talk to nervous animals back when he volunteered at the local shelter years ago. "Easy now, Rusty. It's okay, boy, good cat." Rusty flickered his torn ear in Miller's direction, but didn't break his intense focus on the fox. He seemed to understand Miller wasn't an immediate threat, but his priority remained the circling predator. The fox, meanwhile, seemed to be weighing its options: the potential meal versus the risk posed by both the surprisingly tenacious cat and the approaching human. It wasn't backing down easily. Miller needed to get closer to drive the fox off properly. But the terrain was uneven, littered with fallen branches and slick leaves. He also needed something more substantial than just his voice to appear threatening. He scanned the ground, spotting a sturdy fallen branch a few yards away. Keeping his movement slow and predictable, he edged towards it, never taking his eyes off the tense triangle of animals. As Miller moved, Rusty seemed to grow more agitated, not by Miller himself, but by the stalemate. The monkey was clearly weakening, its whimpers growing fainter. The cat seemed to understand that his defense couldn't last forever. He glanced quickly at Miller, then back at the fox. then let out a sharp, demanding meow, very different from his usual silence or low growls. It sounded almost like a plea. Then Rusty did something Miller had never seen him do in all the years of observation. He took a few quick steps towards Miller, meowed loudly again, then darted back towards the monkey, looking back pointedly at the old man. He repeated the sequence: run towards Miller, meow, run back to the monkey. It was unmistakable. The feral cat, the creature who normally wouldn't let Miller within 20 feet, was asking for help. He was trying to communicate the urgency, trying to bridge the gap between their species. This spurred Miller to move more quickly. He reached the branch, gripping its reassuring weight. As he straightened up, the fox seemed to sense the shift in dynamics. It lowered its head slightly, its tail giving a tentative flick. It was still hesitant to abandon a potential meal. Miller knew he had to be decisive. He took a firmer step forward, raising the branch slightly. "Get out of here!" He yelled, his voice sharp and commanding, startlingly loud in the quiet woods. "Go on, get!" Simultaneously, Rusty seemed to take courage from Miller's action, letting out his own ferocious yowl and taking another aggressive step toward the fox. The combined threat, the advancing human with a potential weapon, and the unexpectedly fierce cat, was finally enough. The fox hesitated for one more second, then turned abruptly and melted back into the dense undergrowth, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The immediate danger was gone, but the situation remained critical. Rusty immediately returned his attention to the injured monkey, nudging it gently with his nose, a soft purr-like rumble now replacing the aggressive growls. The monkey flinched, but didn't try to move away. Miller slowly lowered the branch, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. Now came the next challenge, approaching the injured primate and its unlikely guardian without causing further distress. The strange alliance had held off the predator, but the rescue was far from over. With the fox gone, an uneasy quiet settled over the small clearing, broken only by the monkey's soft whimpers and Rusty's low, rumbling purr growl. Miller stood still for a long moment, letting the adrenaline subside, observing the interaction between the cat and the monkey. Rusty was no longer circling defensively, but stayed close, occasionally nudging the monkey's uninjured side, seemingly offering some strange form of feline comfort or reassurance. The monkey, while still clearly terrified and in pain, wasn't trying to bite or scratch the cat. It seemed to almost lean into the proximity. Miller knew he had to act fast. The monkey needed medical attention urgently, but approaching could be tricky. Rusty was still a feral cat, his behavior unpredictable, especially after the stressful encounter, and the monkey, though small, could bite out of fear or pain. He took a tentative step closer, speaking softly. "It's all right, Rusty. The danger's gone now. Let me see your little friend." Rusty looked up at Miller, his golden eyes wary but no longer hostile. He didn't retreat, nor did he show aggression towards Miller. He simply watched a silent sentinel beside the injured primate. Miller took another slow step. He could now see the monkey's broken arm more clearly. The bone was likely fractured badly, possibly compound. The poor creature was shivering violently, likely going into shock. As Miller got within about 10 feet, Rusty did something completely unprecedented, something that shattered the years of cautious distance between them. He stopped nudging. The monkey turned deliberately towards Miller, walked directly up to the old man's boots and rubbed his head firmly against Miller's leg, letting out a series of insistent questioning meows. He looked up at Miller, then glanced pointedly back at the injured monkey, then back at Miller again. The message was crystal clear. Do something, help him. It was a profound moment of trust, a deliberate crossing of the invisible line that had always separated them. The feral cat, the survivor who trusted no one, was now actively soliciting Miller's intervention, placing his faith and the fate of the creature he was protecting into the hands of the human he had always avoided. This act galvanized Miller, dissolving his remaining hesitation. The cat's explicit plea, this shocking display of trust and interspecies communication, resonated deeply within the solitary old man. It wasn't just about rescuing an injured animal anymore. It was about honoring this bizarre, courageous alliance, about answering the call for help from an unexpected quarter. This was the turning point. He was no longer just an observer drawn into a strange scene. He was an active participant recruited by a feral cat to save an exotic monkey. "Okay, Rusty," Miller said softly, his voice filled with newfound resolve. "Okay, boy, I understand. Let's get your friend some help." He crouched down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might spook either animal. Rusty stayed close, watching Miller's every move with intense concentration, but made no move to interfere. Miller assessed the best way to lift the tiny monkey without causing more pain. He decided to use his sturdy canvas jacket as a makeshift sling. Slipping it off carefully, he laid it gently on the ground beside the monkey. The real rescue effort was about to begin, facilitated by the most unlikely of partnerships. The point of no return had been crossed, initiated not by human decision alone, but by a feral cat's extraordinary act of trust. Moving with the slow, deliberate care of someone used to handling frightened creatures, Miller gently positioned his folded jacket alongside the injured monkey. The little primate watched him with wide, dark eyes, shivering but too weak, or perhaps too trusting of Rusty's presence nearby to offer much resistance. Rusty remained a silent observer, sitting just a foot away, his tail occasionally twitching, his golden eyes flicking between Miller and the monkey. His presence seemed to have a calming effect, or perhaps the monkey was simply too exhausted to struggle. "Easy does it, little fella," Miller murmured, extending a hand slowly towards the monkey's uninjured side. He needed to scoop it gently onto the jacket. As his hand got closer, he noticed something partially hidden beneath the monkey's matted fur near its neck, a thin, worn, dark-colored strap. A collar, faded and simple, but unmistakably a collar. This confirmed his suspicion. Definitely an escaped or abandoned pet. Someone somewhere might even be missing this little creature desperately, or perhaps cruelly discarded it. The thought added another layer of poignancy to the rescue. With one swift but gentle motion, Miller slid his hands underneath the monkey and lifted it onto the center of his jacket. The monkey let out a sharp cry of pain as its broken arm jostled, but Miller quickly gathered the edges of the jacket, creating a soft, secure hammock. The monkey settled slightly, trembling, but contained. As Miller carefully stood up, holding the jacket sling securely, he glanced down at Rusty, who had remained sitting stoically throughout the process. In that moment, with the sunlight hitting the cat's head just right, Miller noticed it clearly for the first time, the clean, straight edge on the tip of Rusty's left ear. It wasn't a battle scar. It was the unmistakable mark of a TNR trap-neuter return program. Someone at some point had caught Rusty neutered him and likely vaccinated him before releasing him back into his territory. This small detail clicked several things into place for Miller. It explained Rusty's general health and resilience despite being feral. More importantly, it meant Rusty had experienced human handling before, however stressful it might have been during the TNR process. He wasn't entirely untouched by the human world. Perhaps that past interaction, that brief period of human care, even if clinical, had left some imprint, some residual understanding or tolerance that allowed him to overcome his feral instincts and seek help from Miller today. It didn't fully explain his defense of the monkey, but it made his later approach to Miller seem slightly less inexplicable. He wasn't just a wild animal. He was a survivor existing in the liminal space between wildness and the edges of human influence. Holding the makeshift sling carefully, Miller began the slow walk back towards his cabin. He needed to get the monkey inside where it was warm and safe, and then figure out who to call. He glanced back once Rusty was following, padding silently several yards behind him, his orange form a bright splash against the greens and browns of the forest floor. He wasn't coming too close, maintaining his cautious distance, but he was escorting them, ensuring his charge made it to safety. The journey back felt longer than the walk out. Miller was acutely aware of the fragile life cradled in his jacket, the tiny body occasionally trembling. He focused on his footing, avoiding roots and loose stones. Reaching the edge of his small clearing, he looked back again. Rusty had stopped at the tree line, a silent, watchful figure. He gave one slow blink, then turned and melted noiselessly back into the shadows of the woods. His part in this strange drama was over. Miller reached his cabin door, fumbling slightly with the latch while balancing his precious cargo. He pushed the door open and stepped inside, finally bringing the injured monkey out of the wild and into the relative safety of the human world, all thanks to the intervention of its unlikely, fierce, and enigmatic guardian. The most critical phase, getting help, was about to begin. Inside the cabin, the immediate crisis shifted from outdoor survival to urgent care. Miller gently placed the jacket sling containing the monkey into a large, empty cardboard box. He quickly lined with clean towels, creating a makeshift bed. The monkey huddled in the corner, looking overwhelmed by the unfamiliar surroundings, but no longer shivering quite as violently. Now that it was out of the cold, Miller placed a shallow dish of water nearby, though the creature showed no interest yet. His first priority was getting professional help. Living this far out meant cell service was spotty, but his landline worked reliably. He thumbed through a small address book where he kept important local numbers, finding the listing for Appalachian Wildlife Rescue, a small non-profit organization run by dedicated volunteers that covered this region. He dialed, explaining the situation as clearly and concisely as possible. The discovery of the injured non-native monkey near the forest edge, the obvious broken limb, its current condition. The volunteer on the other end, a calm woman named Sarah, listened patiently, asked a few clarifying questions about the monkey's size and appearance, confirming it was likely a marmoset, possibly kept illegally or escaped from a licensed owner miles away, and assured Miller they would dispatch someone as soon as possible, though it might take an hour or more given his remote location, She advised him to keep the monkey warm, quiet, and contained, and not to offer food until it had been assessed by a professional. Miller hung up, feeling a sense of relief that help was on the way. He pulled a chair near the box. Sitting quietly watching over the tiny patient, the monkey had closed its eyes, its breathing shallow but regular. It looked incredibly fragile. He thought about Rusty, the tough orange cat out there somewhere in the woods. What had possessed him to act so bravely, so contrary to his nature? Miller doubted he would ever fully understand it. He just knew he had witnessed something extraordinary. The immediate struggle for the monkey's survival, initiated by Rusty's defense and plea for help, was now in the hands of the rescue organization. The central question, would the monkey be saved after this bizarre chain of events, was on its way to being answered. All Miller could do now was wait and hope. About 90 minutes later, a sturdy SUV with the Wildlife Rescue logo pulled up the gravel driveway. Sarah, the volunteer Miller had spoken to, and a male colleague named Ben, equipped with carriers and first aid supplies, came to the door. Miller led them inside, explaining the morning's events in more detail, including Rusty's unbelievable role in both defending the monkey and alerting him. Sarah and Ben were clearly surprised, but listened intently. They expertly examined the marmoset, confirming the severe fracture and signs of dehydration and shock. "You definitely did the right thing bringing him in and calling us Mr. Miller," Sarah said gently, preparing a small, secure carrier. "And that cat? Well, nature is full of surprises, isn't it?" They carefully transferred the marmoset into the carrier for transport back to their facility, where a veterinarian specializing in exotic animals would assess and treat its injuries. They promised to keep Miller updated if they learned anything about the monkey's origins. After they left, the cabin felt exceptionally quiet again. Miller walked back outside, scanning the tree line where Rusty had disappeared. There was no sign of the cat. That evening, Miller put out a double portion of Rusty's usual dry food along with a small can of tuna as a special reward, placing it closer to the cabin steps than usual. He didn't know if Rusty would accept the offering or the implied truce, but he felt compelled to acknowledge the cat's actions. The next morning, the food bowls were empty. Miller couldn't be sure if Rusty or another creature had eaten it, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. Over the following days, Miller kept a closer eye out for the orange cat. He saw Rusty occasionally hunting near the wood's edge, or sometimes just sitting, observing the cabin from a distance. There was a subtle shift. Miller thought the cat still kept his distance, still vanished like smoke if Miller approached too directly, but the wariness in his golden eyes seemed slightly lessened, replaced perhaps by a flicker of recognition, a shared memory of the strange morning alliance. A week later, Sarah from the Wildlife Rescue called the marmoset, whom they'd nicknamed Pip, had undergone surgery for his broken arm and was recovering well. They hadn't located an owner and suspected he might have been illegally kept and then abandoned when his care became too much. Pip would eventually be placed in a reputable primate sanctuary. Sarah thanked Miller again for his help. Miller, in turn, felt a quiet sense of closure. He never fully understood the bond that flashed between the feral cat and the injured monkey that day. But witnessing Rusty's courage and inexplicable compassion had subtly changed his own perspective on the wildness surrounding him, reminding him that connection and bravery could appear in the most unexpected forms right there at the edge of the woods. He continued to leave food out for Rusty, a silent acknowledgement of the fierce, independent spirit who had, for one extraordinary morning, become a guardian. Mr. Miller often thought about the unbelievable scene that day. A feral cat, inherently a solitary predator, stood up to protect a weak creature of a completely different species, a small monkey lost and injured. The fierce protection against the fox, the gentle comforting nudge once the danger passed, and even the intelligent act of seeking human help all seemed to go far beyond ordinary survival instincts. Was it true friendship, born from dire circumstances and unexpected empathy between two vulnerable beings? Or just a strange moment in nature, a mysterious bond that humans struggled to explain? Whatever it was, the image of the brave orange cat and the poor little monkey relying on each other at the forest edge became a touching testament to compassion and strange connections that transcended any natural boundary he had ever known. He found a kitten in a box with holes by the road. What was inside will break your heart. How could a simple act of kindness towards an abandoned kitten unravel a conspiracy hidden within the walls of a trusted institution? The truth involves more than just stolen fortunes. It reveals a shocking betrayal that will make you question everything. Subscribe, like, and listen now to discover the heartbreaking secret found beside the road. The flickering cursor pulsed mockingly on the laptop screen, illuminating John's face in the pre-dawn gloom. Outside, the wind howled a mournful dirge through the bare branches of the Pennsylvania woods surrounding his isolated cabin. Inside, the only sounds were the rhythmic click of the hard drive and the frantic thumping of John's own heart. He shouldn't have plugged it in. He knew it the moment his fingers closed around the cool, smooth plastic of the flash drive, nestled impossibly beneath the shivering, mewling orange kitten in that damp cardboard box. Hours earlier, curiosity, that old betrayer, had won out over caution. Now, staring at the fragmented, heavily encrypted files that swam before his tired eyes, caution seemed like a quaint, forgotten luxury. Most files were digital garbage, corrupted or locked behind passwords that defied his rudimentary attempts, but a few yielded terrifying glimpses. A grainy, sideways video clip, mercifully short, showing frightened eyes above a gag. A spreadsheet fragment listing names, first names only, beside cryptic codes and alarming financial figures suggesting depletion. A single, chilling audio file, distorted and filled with static, but clear enough to capture a whispered plea ending abruptly in a muffled sound that made John's blood run cold. This wasn't just carelessness. This wasn't teenage mischief. The drive felt heavy, not with data, but with deliberate chilling intent. Someone had put it there, hidden beneath an innocent life, a tiny furry Trojan horse carrying a message of desperation. Who were they? Who were the names on the list? What horrors did the encrypted files truly hold? He clicked on another partially recovered file, a simple text document. A single sentence materialized through the digital noise. Maple Creek. They take everything. Help us. Maple Creek, the assisted living facility just outside town. John's hand tightened on the mouse, his knuckles white. He'd driven past it 100 times, a neat brick building with manicured lawns. Now it loomed in his mind like a fortress hiding unspeakable secrets. The drive wasn't just data. It was a cry for help, smuggled out of hell, delivered by an abandoned kitten. And somehow, inexplicably, it had landed in his lap. The responsibility settled on him like a shroud, cold and absolute. What in God's name had he stumbled into? Just 12 hours earlier, John Callahan had been navigating the familiar curves of Route 322, the aging engine of his Ford pickup, a familiar rumble against the quiet backdrop of a fading autumn afternoon. 68 years old, a widower for 5 long years. Since Martha succumbed to cancer and retired after 20 years in the Army, followed by another 20 running logistics for a local trucking company, John's life had settled into a predictable, solitary rhythm. His days were marked by routine coffee, the local newspaper, tinkering with the truck, a walk through the woods behind his cabin, maybe a trip into town for supplies, evenings spent with a book or the flickering blue light of the television. The silence of the house, once shared with Martha's laughter and bustling energy, often felt vast and suffocating. His service in logistics during Desert Storm had taught him meticulousness and the importance of supply lines, but it hadn't prepared him for the logistical nightmare of navigating grief and loneliness. That afternoon, something small and out of place snagged his attention. The cardboard box perched precariously on the gravel shoulder, looking tragically inadequate against the vastness of the encroaching woods he'd almost driven past. Old habits, perhaps. The ingrained instinct to investigate anomalies, or maybe just a flicker of the compassion Martha had always accused him of hiding beneath a gruff exterior. He pulled over the truck's tires, crunching on the gravel. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. He approached the box cautiously. Seeing the small punched holes confirmed his fear. Animals abandoned. Inside, the tiny ball of orange fur looked up at him, shivering violently, its mews thin and reedy. Its vulnerability was absolute. John, a man who'd faced down harder things than he cared to remember, felt his reserve crumble. He scooped the kitten up, tucking it gently inside his worn canvas jacket, its tiny body of fragile warmth against his chest. Back home, he'd fashioned a makeshift bed from an old towel, warmed some milk diluted with water, remembering something Martha had done for a stray years ago, and watched as the little creature, eventually succumbing to hunger, began to lap tentatively. He'd named him Rusty, for the vibrant color of his coat that seemed to defy the bleakness of his arrival. It was only later, after Rusty had finally fallen asleep in the warm haven near the fireplace, that John dealt with the box. Ready to flatten it for recycling, he felt something hard and unyielding taped securely beneath a folded flap on the bottom. Not just taped, but concealed. Carefully, he worked the tape loose. Inside, the small cavity was the flash drive. Finding it felt wrong, jarring. Why hide this here? His initial thought was drugs. Some clumsy rural drop-off gone wrong. But the meticulousness of the concealment suggested something else. Back at his desk, the initial shock of plugging it in gave way to a growing dread as the fragmented files revealed their disturbing nature. Maple Creek. They take everything, help us. The words echoed in the quiet room. John stared at the screen, then looked over at the sleeping kitten, an innocent pawn in a game he didn't understand. He could delete the files, throw the drive into the woods, pretend he never found it, return to his quiet, predictable life. But the image of those frightened eyes in the video clip, the desperate whisper on the audio file, the stark plea mentioning Maple Creek, they wouldn't let him go. Someone had risked everything to get this message out. Ignoring it felt like complicity. He thought of his own service, the promises made to protect the vulnerable. He thought of Martha, who never turned away from someone in need. The choice, though daunting, became clear. He couldn't stand by. Inciting incident. He had to understand what was happening at Maple Creek. He had to find out who needed help and why. His initial cautious goal formed: investigate Maple Creek, decode more of the drive, and figure out how to help without getting anyone, including himself, killed. The lonely quiet of his retirement was definitely over. John's first step was cautious reconnaissance. Donning his least conspicuous jacket and a baseball cap, he drove into town and parked across the street from Maple Creek Assisted Living. From the outside, it looked exactly as he remembered: a respectable 2-story brick building with neatly trimmed hedges and cheerful flower beds, incongruous with the secrets the flash drive hinted at. He watched residents sitting on the porch, staff members in pale blue scrubs coming and going. Nothing seemed overtly sinister, yet the message on the drive painted a different picture. They take everything: financial exploitation, theft of property. Worse, back home, he focused on the flash drive. His own tech skills were dated, mostly honed on military systems from decades ago. He spent hours running basic recovery software, trying different decryption keys based on common patterns or words related to Maple Creek. But the encryption was robust. Frustrated, he reached out to an old Army buddy, Dave Riley, a signals intelligence whiz who now ran a cybersecurity consultancy from his home in Arizona. Explaining the situation vaguely over an encrypted call, mentioning finding sensitive information, potentially related to elder abuse, John asked for advice. Dave was skeptical, but intrigued. "Sounds like you tripped over something nasty." "John, be careful. This stuff can get ugly fast. Send me a clone of the drive, encrypted, of course. I'll poke at it, see if I can crack the wrapper, but no promises. And watch your six." While waiting for Dave's analysis, John tried a different approach. He visited Maple Creek, pretending to inquire about placement for a fictitious elderly uncle. He met with the facility director, a Mrs. Albright, a woman with tightly pinned gray hair, a practiced smile, and eyes that seemed a little too sharp, a little too assessing. She gave him the standard tour, highlighting the amenities, the caring staff, the secure environment. John asked subtle questions about financial arrangements, power of attorney procedures, and resident outings. Mrs. Albright's answers were smooth, professional, perhaps too smooth. He noticed security cameras were ubiquitous, angled not just at entrances, but also common areas and hallways. He saw staff interacting with residents. Some seemed genuinely warm, others distant, almost watchful. He left with a glossy brochure and a deep sense of unease. Mrs. Albright's smile hadn't quite reached her eyes. Complications soon arose. A few days after his visit, John noticed a dark sedan parked down the road from his cabin, staying for an hour before driving off slowly. Coincidence? Maybe. Then came the hang-up calls, silence on the other end, then a click. His internet connection, usually reliable, started dropping intermittently. Paranoia, or was someone probing? He felt a prickle of unease, the old situational awareness from his Army days kicking in. He started varying his routines, checking his rearview mirror more often, securing his cabin meticulously at night. Rusty, oblivious, chased dust bunnies and purred contentedly on his lap, a small anchor of normalcy in the growing strangeness. Caring for the kitten was a welcome distraction, but also a vulnerability. He couldn't just pack up and leave if things got too hot. He made another, riskier move. The drive contained fragments of what looked like transportation logs, dates, Times initials, and codes like PX transfer or LN Rillo. He staked out the delivery entrance of Maple Creek early one morning. A nondescript white van from a company called Keystone Secure Transport arrived. The driver, a burly man with a sullen expression, exchanged brief words with a staff member before heading inside. John noted the company name and license plate. A quick online search revealed Keystone provided medical transport, but also specialized in discreet relocation services. Relocation of whom and why discreetly? Dave called back a week later. "Okay, Johnny, got something. This encryption is non-standard layered. Whoever set this up knew their stuff, but I bypassed a layer, decrypted a couple more small files. One is a partial audio log. Sounds like someone, maybe the person who made the drive, was secretly recording conversations. I heard Mrs. Albright, definitely her voice signature, talking to someone about liquidating assets before the transfer and mentioning Keystone handling the transition. Another file is a ledger fragment, correlates names, dates, and withdrawals, large sums, John too large for pocket money. They take everything. It was financial ruin disguised as care, and Keystone Transport was involved in moving, where John felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This was bigger and more organized than he'd feared. And now, thanks to Dave cracking part of the drive, they had concrete, albeit fragmented evidence. The stakes had just skyrocketed. He was no longer just curious. He was holding proof of serious crimes, and the people behind it were likely aware someone had the potential to expose them. The dark sedan reappeared the next day, parking closer this time. The fragmented audio log Dave Riley had partially decrypted gnawed at John Albright's voice, cool and calculating, discussing the liquidation of assets, the mention of Keystone Secure Transport. It painted a grim picture, but it wasn't enough. It was circumstantial, easily deniable. He needed something more definitive, something that tied the financial exploitation directly to the disappearance or silencing of residents. He spent hours poring over the decrypted ledger fragments, cross-referencing the cryptic initials with public records, obituaries, property transfer records, anything he could find online. It was slow, painstaking work, yielding little. The perpetrators were careful. His break came unexpectedly. One of the partially recovered video files, previously just a blur of motion, yielded a few clearer frames after Dave applied some stabilizing algorithms. It showed the interior of what looked like a Maple Creek residence room, sparsely decorated. In the corner, for a split second, a framed photograph was visible on a nightstand. It showed a younger woman with bright red hair standing beside an elderly lady in a wheelchair. The older lady wore a distinctive hummingbird brooch. John froze. He recognized the brooch. He'd seen it pinned to the sweater of a quiet resident, Eleanor Vance, during his tour. She'd been sitting alone in the sunroom, staring out the window. He hadn't spoken to her, but the unique brooch had caught his eye. Driven by a hunch, John searched online for Eleanor Vance and Maple Creek. He found a few scattered mentions on local forums, mostly complaining about restricted visiting hours over the past year. Then he found a worried post from a few months back by someone identifying herself as Sarah K. Eleanor's niece. Sarah wrote about her aunt seeming withdrawn and fearful during recent visits, mentioning missing personal items and how her calls were suddenly being screened by Mrs. Albright, citing Eleanor's fragile state. The most recent post was frantic. Sarah hadn't been able to reach Eleanor at all for 2 weeks. The facility claimed she'd been transferred to a specialized memory care unit upstate for her own safety, but refused to provide details, citing privacy laws. The niece was desperate, suspecting foul play. This was it, the connection. Eleanor Vance, the woman with the hummingbird brooch, was likely one of the names on the hidden ledger, her assets liquidated before she was transferred by Keystone Transport. And the person who made the flash drive, very likely, Sarah Kay. The niece, who must have suspected something, tried to gather evidence during a visit, perhaps planting a recording device or accessing files briefly, and then, fearing discovery or unable to go to the authorities directly, hid the drive with the kitten as a desperate last-ditch effort before possibly being intercepted herself or forced to flee. Revelation and turning point. John sat back, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just theft. It was systematic isolation, exploitation, and likely forcible relocation or worse of vulnerable elderly residents whose families weren't nearby or vigilant enough. Maple Creek, under Mrs. Albright's direction, was a predatory operation using Keystone Transport as its muscle to make inconvenient residents disappear once their money ran out. The flash drive was Sarah's cry for help, not just for her aunt, but potentially for others trapped in the same scheme. John realized his cautious probing was no longer viable. He couldn't just gather bits and pieces. Albright and her associates were clearly sophisticated and ruthless. If they suspected someone had the drive, they wouldn't hesitate to silence them. Him, Dave, maybe even Sarah, if they hadn't already. Approaching the local police felt risky. Small towns often had intertwined relationships, and Albright seemed well connected. He needed undeniable proof, something that couldn't be buried or explained away, and he needed to deliver it in a way that bypassed potentially compromised local channels. He was no longer just investigating. He had to actively plan an exposure. The game had changed. He moved from reacting to the information on the drive to proactively seeking the final evidence needed to bring the operation down. This was his point of no return. He looked over at Rusty, batting playfully at a loose thread on the rug. "Well, kid," he murmured, "looks like we're in this deep." He picked up the phone to call Dave Riley again. This time, they weren't just decrypting, they were planning. The plan John and Dave concocted was risky, bordering on reckless, but it felt like the only viable options. They needed proof connecting Albright directly to Keystone, and the illicit transfers ideally catching her in the act or obtaining incriminating documents. Their target, Albright's office at Maple Creek. Dave's contribution was technical. A miniaturized audio recorder disguised as a USB charger and a software worm designed to copy specific file types from Maple Creek's internal network. If plugged into a connected computer, John's role was infiltration. Getting inside again wouldn't be easy after his initial inquiring relative visit. He couldn't risk using the same pretext. Instead, he decided to exploit a potential weakness: the facility's reliance on outside vendors. He spent a day observing the building, noting the schedules of cleaning crews and maintenance workers. He noticed a landscaping crew arrived every Tuesday morning like clockwork. It was a long shot, but it was a chance. John acquired a plausible-looking landscaper's uniform: simple work pants, a faded green polo shirt, heavy boots, and a baseball cap pulled low. He loaded his truck with some basic gardening tools borrowed from a neighbor. The riskiest part was timing his arrival to blend in with the regular crew, hoping to slip inside during the morning bustle when staff were focused on resident care and shift changes. The following Tuesday felt unnaturally bright, the tension coiling in John's stomach. He parked down the street and waited. As the landscaping company's truck pulled into the Maple Creek lot, John grabbed his tools and walked towards the service entrance, trying to look purposeful but unremarkable. He fell into step behind two actual landscapers heading inside, nodding briefly as they held the door. No one challenged him. Heart pounding, he peeled off from the crew once inside, heading towards the administrative wing, guided by the memory of his earlier tour. Albright's office was located at the end of a quiet corridor. The door was unlocked. Taking a deep breath, he slipped inside. The office was neat, organized, impersonal. He quickly located a power strip beneath the desk and plugged in the disguised USB charger recorder. Step 1 complete. Step 2 was accessing her computer. It was password protected as expected. Dave had anticipated this. The software worm was on a separate standard-looking flash drive. John inserted it into a USB port. A small indicator light blinked. It was attempting to bypass the login screen and copy files based on keywords Dave had programmed: Keystone, Transfer, Vance, Financial Terms. It would take time. He couldn't linger. He removed the drive, hoping it had captured something, anything. He slipped back out of the office. His nerves frayed. He needed to retrieve the audio recorder later. But planting it and attempting the data grab felt like a small victory. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with the burly Keystone transport driver he'd seen before. The man grunted, giving John a suspicious look. "You knew?" the driver asked, his eyes narrowing. "Just helping out today," John mumbled, keeping his head down and moving quickly towards the exit, his heart hammering against his ribs. Did the driver recognize him from his earlier stakeout? He couldn't be sure. He made it outside without further incident, melting back into the morning activity. The wait was agonizing. He retrieved the audio recorder the next day, using a similar nerve-wracking infiltration during a scheduled fire alarm test that created momentary chaos. Back home, he uploaded the audio and the contents of the data-grabbing flash drive to Dave via their secure channel. The results were mixed. The flash drive had failed to bypass the login credentials. The data grab was a bust, but the audio recorder, that was different. It had captured hours of conversation. Much of it was mundane, calls about scheduling supplies, complaints, but then nestled within the recordings was gold. A 15-minute conversation between Albright and the Keystone driver. They discussed an upcoming PX transfer, patient XFER, mentioning specific medications to be administered beforehand, enough to keep her quiet for the trip, and confirming a cash payment for the discreet handling. They didn't use names, but the context was damning. This was the proof John needed, but his success came at a cost. The day after retrieving the recorder, he found one of his truck's tires slashed. The message was clear. They knew someone was snooping. He felt a wave of fear, not just for himself, but for Rusty. Was he being reckless? Was he putting them both in danger? This was the dark night of the soul Dave had warned him about. He was just one old man against a ruthless operation. Could he really pull this off? Looking at Rusty curled trustingly on his armchair, John found his resolve hardening. He had to see this through for Eleanor, for Sarah, for whatever other victims were trapped in Albright's web. He wouldn't let them down. He contacted Dave. It was time to prepare for the final step, leaking the information. They needed to choose their target carefully and time it perfectly. John and Dave decided against local police or state agencies, fearing leaks or bureaucratic delays. Their target, a well-respected investigative journalist at the Philadelphia Inquirer, known for tackling corruption and sensitive stories. Dave vetted her digital security practices and found them solid. The plan was to upload the evidence, the decrypted fragments from the original drive, the damning audio recording from Albright's office, John's testimony, and the information about Sarah Kay, as desperate forum posts. To a secure, anonymous drop point Dave established, they would simultaneously send an encrypted tip to the journalist, pointing her to the data. The timing was crucial. Dave's analysis of the decrypted ledger fragments suggested a pattern. Large withdrawals and transfers often happened near the end of the month. They suspected the upcoming PX transfer discussed on the audio recording was imminent. John spent 2 days watching Maple Creek in the Keystone van, confirming the pattern held. The transfer was likely happening Friday night. They decided to leak the data Thursday evening, giving the journalist just enough time to verify parts of it and perhaps alert trusted contacts in state law enforcement simultaneously for maximum impact. When the story broke, hopefully disrupting the planned transfer, Thursday evening arrived heavy. With anticipation, John sat at his laptop, Rusty asleep at his feet, oblivious to the tension. Dave was connected remotely from Arizona, running final checks on the secure upload portal. "Ready when you are, Johnny." Dave's voice crackled softly through the encrypted comms link. John took a deep breath and began the upload sequence. The progress bar crawled agonizingly slowly. Every creak of the cabin floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He half expected headlights to sweep across his window at any moment. Suddenly, Rusty shot up, ears pricked, letting out a low growl towards the front door. John's blood ran cold. He heard it too. The crunch of tires on the gravel driveway outside. Not the road, his driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness. He killed the lights in the cabin, plunging the room into near blackness, his hand instinctively reaching for the heavy mag light he kept by the door. The upload was only 80% complete. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps approached the porch. John held his breath, heart pounding. A sharp rap echoed on the door. "Mr. Callahan, we just have a few questions." The voice was smooth, calm, but held an undercurrent of menace. It wasn't Albright. Maybe the Keystone driver or someone else. "Almost there, John." Dave urged through the tiny earpiece. 90%. John didn't answer the knock. He stayed silent, hidden in the shadows, praying the upload would finish before they decided to break the door down. Another harder knock. "We know you're in there, Mr. Callahan, and we know what you found." 95%. The footsteps moved, circling the cabin. A flashlight beam cut across the window. "Done upload, complete, tip sent." Dave exclaimed, "Get out if you can, John." Just as John processed Dave's words, a heavy thud vibrated through the doorframe. They were trying to force it. He grabbed Rusty, shoving the startled cat into his carrier, snatched his keys and the maglite, and bolted toward the back door, plunging into the dark woods behind his cabin just as the front door splintered open. He didn't look back. John spent a harrowing night hidden in the woods, Rusty shivering quietly in the carrier. At dawn, he cautiously made his way to a neighboring farm. Explaining enough to warrant a ride into the next town where he contacted Dave and then waited nerves raw, the story broke Saturday morning. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran a devastating front-page expose detailing the predatory scheme at Maple Creek, citing anonymous sources, leaked audio financial data, and the suspicious disappearance of residents like Eleanor Vance. The article mentioned the flash drive and the desperate attempt by a relative, Sarah Kay, to seek help. State police, alerted by the journalist and armed with damning evidence, descended on Maple Creek Assisted Living and Keystone Secure Transport simultaneously. The fallout was swift. Mrs. Albright and several key staff members were arrested. The Keystone driver and his associates were apprehended. The facility was placed under state receivership, and a full investigation was launched into the whereabouts and well-being of dozens of former residents listed in the fragmented ledgers. Some, like Eleanor Vance, were located in substandard isolated facilities, upstate, drugged and neglected, but alive. They were rescued. Others tragically were feared, deceased, or lost to the system, their assets long gone. Sarah Kay was eventually found. She had gone into hiding after realizing her evidence might have been discovered, terrified of retribution. She tearfully thanked the anonymous source who had acted on her desperate gamble. John eventually returned to his cabin. The front door repaired the immediate danger past. He gave a statement to the state police corroborating the journalist's findings, but keeping his methods and Dave's involvement discreet. He was hailed locally as a quiet hero. Though he deflected the attention, life gradually returned to a semblance of normal. But it was a new normal. The silence of the cabin felt different now, less lonely, more peaceful. He had faced danger again, not on a battlefield, but in his own backyard, and he had made a difference. He looked down at Rusty, now purring loudly on his lap. The undisputed king of the cabin, the little orange kitten, the unwitting messenger, had saved more than just John from loneliness. He had been the catalyst, the tiny spark igniting a fire that exposed a terrible darkness. The heartbreak wasn't just in the initial discovery, but in the chilling reality of the exploitation they had uncovered and the uncertain fates of some victims. But amidst that heartbreak, there was also hope. In the rescues, the justice served, and the quiet courage of ordinary people like Sarah and like John himself, unwilling to look away. He stroked Rusty's soft fur. "Quite the adventure we stumbled into, huh, pal?" he murmured. The purring grew louder.